I'm Evan Cole, 32. Tonight my father told me not to come for Thanksgiving, said I was useless. In a few hours. CNN will cover the $80 million deal. I closed. If you were my age, would you pick up again, or let the quiet answer for you? Seattle. Washington wore November like a dim lampshade. Streetlight halos hovered over wet pavement. And the windows across the courtyard glowed and faded as people settled into rooms that knew their names. I stood in mine with the phone face down on the table. The kind of posture that says the conversation is over, even if the line is still warm. The sentence he left behind did not shout. It arrived flat and tidy. Like a receipt slid under a door, do not come. Not worth the seat. I did not rehearse a response. I turned the phone a quarter turn, so the camera faced the wall and let the room keep its shape. On the counter, and a small tray of stuffing waited for an oven already cooling. I twisted the knob fully off and listened for the soft metal tick that follows heat. The scent of sage and butter leaned into the air, ordinary comfort. The kind that asks nothing back. I preferred it to any performance of civility that ends with a tally. The television was a quiet rectangle across the room. I did not wake it. I knew when the business segment usually lands. That was enough. Anticipation can make a night feel smaller if you let it set the clocks. I pulled open the shallow drawer beneath the coffee table, slipped the remote inside, and eased the wood shut. One decision made. And made gently. I took the notebook from the bookcase, the one with the cloth spine that holds firm, and sat at the table. I have learned to translate harsh words before they fix themselves to me. On a clean page, I wrote the meaning without the heat. Then drew a short line beneath it and noted the simple forecast for the evening segment expected. Keep pace steady. No speeches to the future. No proof to assemble. Just a map with 2 points. Outside. A bus slowed through an intersection and moved on. Interior lights, carrying a few small scenes. From somewhere above, a laugh tried the stairwell. Echoed once. Then gave up. The building exhaled the way old buildings do. With patience and a little pride, I let the ordinary sounds decide the scale of my night. I rinsed a glass and filled it from the tap. The water was cold enough to persuade thought to slow down. In the dark window, I saw my shoulders higher than they needed to be. I lowered them, the way you set a box down carefully, as if something inside might slide if you dropped it. The glass left a brief fog print on the pane. It faded. Most things do when you stop feeding them. If this had happened a few years ago, I would have drafted a case in my head and practiced the calm voice I never got to use. I would have arranged examples like silver on a table and waited for someone to notice. I am older now. I am done setting places for arguments nobody intends to sit through. The apartment lent its order to me. I folded the dish towel, squared the edge of the rug with my foot, turned off the kitchen light, and stood a moment in the doorway to remember the room at its proper size. With the hallway dim, the living area gathered its corners and held them without help. I breathed. The room matched the breath, and the night stopped trying to prove itself. A calendar nudge arrived on the phone, a colored square with no authority. I dismissed it and returned the phone to the same circle on the table, then set a cork coaster over it. The gesture looked small, but it told my hands what my mouth was not interested in saying. Boundaries begin with objects. I walked the hallway to the elevator lobby for the simple purpose of walking. The wreath on the wall leaned a touch to the left, and the lemon clean of a recent mop still hung in the air. The panel above the doors counted someone else's ascent. I did not press the button. I did not need to go anywhere to feel moved. Back inside, I placed the folder from the bookshelf on the table and rested my palm on the cover. I did not open it. Completion does not require witnesses. I counted 5 in my head enough time to confirm weight and placement, and returned it to the top shelf. Spine flush with the edge. Order is not vanity, it is rest. I sat again, and built a short list in the notebook, under a heading I use when nights try to borrow my attention: posture. Not performance. 3 lines only. Breathe evenly. Write cleanly. Do not rerun the wound. The last line steadied my ribs more than I expected. Some sentences are tools. You keep them where you can reach them, not where people can see them. Through the window, branches drew thin black marks across the mist. A cyclist passed in a reflective jacket and was gone. Farther off, the faint note of traffic threaded the blocks. Less a roar than a seam. The city did what it always does, held distance and connection in the same hand, without straining either. I checked the volume mark on the television once, then left the screen asleep. The segment would arrive whether or not I hovered. Anticipation is a poor decorator. It crowds a room with chairs, no one will sit in. I preferred space. Up north there would be a long table tonight, heavy with bowls and the choreography of second helpings. Maybe someone would use my chair for a coat. Maybe they would leave it empty as punctuation. Either way, the sentence had already been written, and it did not require my handwriting. I pictured the serving spoon leaning after a deep scoop, and then set the picture back where it belonged. A person can visit a thought without moving in. The lamp beside the sofa has a fabric shade that throws a warm ring onto the table. I pulled the chain and let that ring find the grain in the wood. Light at the right level makes a room honest. I wrote the date in long-form November 2024 and underlined the last word once. Then I added a line meant for tomorrow's eyes. No reply is still a reply. The ink dried fast and flat. Minutes passed in small and useful ways. The oven cooled the rest of the way. The fridge motor hummed and quit. The building stretched once and settled. I looked at my hands where they rested on my knees. Familiar and a little chapped from this weather. These are the same hands that used to carry chairs for people who confused service with silence. Tonight they carried nothing at all. And the absence felt like a correct inventory. I lifted the phone only to switch on Do Not Disturb. A narrow crescent appeared, and learned the room's dimness. I set the phone back in its circle, and did not look for new messages. Replies are agreements. I had made mine already. In the small kitchen, I slid the tray of stuffing into the refrigerator and closed the door, with the soft seal of a plan adjusted without drama. I turned the faucet long enough to hear the water find its true temperature, then shut it and wiped the sink with a square of cloth. There is satisfaction in chores that end when you finish them. At the window, I let my fingertips touch the cool glass. Down on the street, a bus opened its doors at an empty stop, waited the correct number of heartbeats, and closed them again. Practice counts. It teaches a body where the marks are when the audience arrives. I let the thought sit, and then let it go. The night did not need metaphors, it needed room. I stepped back, turned off the lamp, and watched the room return to outlines. The rectangle of the dark television reflected me without comment. I nodded to the outline. Not as approval. Just acknowledgement. A person was here. A person kept his place. That would do. On my way to the bedroom, I paused at the shelf, touched the notebook's spine with one finger, and felt the cloth warm slightly under my skin. It is a small thing. To confirm that tools are within reach. I turned the last switch, let the apartment settle into its softer dark, and lay down with the kind of quiet you do not have to defend. Later, when the city loosens its shoulders and the clock's thin hand finds the right minute, the segment will run. A measured voice will set a figure on the table where public facts sit. And then it will move on. I will meet it when it arrives. Tonight, the only decision that matters has already been made. Let the fact be public, let the answer be private. The rest can wait its turn. Morning arrived without fanfare. Just a paler square, on the wall, where the blinds don't quite meet. The apartment felt like a page with wide margins room around the lines, so none of them pretend to be the whole story. I made coffee, and let the steam write a sentence I didn't need to read. No alarms. No inbox auditions. Just the small assurance of a kettle doing exactly what it promised. On the table, the notebook from last night waited where I'd left it. I opened to the page where I had translated the message I wouldn't answer. Checked the tone. Plain. Not wounded, and closed the cover. I slid the book an inch to the right, so its edge lined with the grain of the wood. Placement first. Polish later. That order keeps me honest. Holiday weeks used to follow a loop I could draw from memory, an early text about chairs. A late request about trash. Errands stacked like plates. None of that is bad by itself. What lingers is the math, how effort gets treated like proof. You deserve the seat you were invited to fill. After enough Novembers, you start recognizing assignments dressed as courtesy. Could you swing by early? Could you grab an extra side? Could you check the lights outside? Yes. I could. I often did. The verdict never moved. I rinsed the mug and let the water run cold. In the window's reflection, my shoulders were still a notch high. I lowered them, and the room answered by feeling larger. On the top shelf sat the folder with the confirmations corners squared. Pages flush. I took it down. Skimmed the last page, the way a carpenter skims a rail for splinters, and returned it to its place. The work was closed. I didn't need to admire it to know that. Outside. The courtyard was a quiet diagram, damp pavement. A low hedge. 2 trees drawing fine lines against a sky that hadn't decided on color. I put on a jacket and rode the elevator down for mail I did not expect to need. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon from a diligent mop. A wreath hung a little crooked over the bench. The panel of mailboxes reflected me in tin squares. A man about to check for something ordinary. Inside my box, a maintenance notice and a flyer for a service I wouldn't use. Good a day can stand on small paperwork. Back upstairs. I filed the notice where such notices live, and made a line in the notebook, under a heading I reserve for days like this: handle without audience. 3 bullets. Archive, a clean copy offline. Note 1 improvement, I'll apply next time. Keep the evening quiet. I stopped there. Lists should fit on one breath. When I was younger, I tried to tidy impressions the way you tidy a room before guests. Extra polish. Extra brightness. Extra proof you belong. It sharpened the table settings. It never softened the sentence that floats above certain family roles: insufficient. That word doesn't shout, it settles. It makes itself at home in logistics. We've got one more dish than seats. Could you skip this year? Delivered with the tone of a weather report. I learned the difference between amending the plan and being amended by it. That's when I started moving my effort toward the rooms that answered back. On the counter. Last night's tray had become breakfast if I wanted it. I didn't. I ate something simple and stood by the sink while the plate cooled to room temperature. The apartment offered its small citizenship, a vent whispering. A door taking its time to close 2 floors up. A neighbor walking soft to spare the hallway. Morning can be kind if you let it go first. I pulled a different notebook from the shelf holder, with edges that curl from steam, and flipped to past Novembers. The handwriting changes over time. The spine does not. Entries read like weather, rain heavy, traffic slow, stayed late, brought extra, left early. None of that proved or disproved anything beyond the fact that I was there. Doing quiet tasks. Not altering the label that preceded me. I closed the book and put it back. The point wasn't to keep score. The point was to keep posture. The phone lay face down under its cork circle. I lifted it long enough to move a calendar nudge into later, and tapped "Do Not Disturb" again out of habit. The crescent icon glowed once, then adjusted to the room. I set the phone down and let my hands be done. Boundaries become second nature when you practice them in daylight, not just at night. I walked the apartment the way a stagehand walks a set, quiet marks. Small checks. Lamp cord tucked. Papers flush. Remote where it belongs. The insistent part of me that wants to tune the future reached for the TV to confirm volume, and I let my hand stop at the drawer. Once is policy, twice is anxiety. The policy was established. Late morning brought a memory. I hadn't invited a kitchen that wasn't mine. A carving knife changing hands. And a sentence smoothing itself into authority. Let someone useful handle that. I can feel the air of that room even now. The way silence tried to pass for good manners. Back then I answered with effort. Stacked chairs. Wiped counters. Stayed late. Today I answer with placement where I stand. Where I don't. I wrote one more line under handle without audience. Prepare the room. Not the defense. It sounds like a motto. It's closer to an instruction. The evening would hold a public fact measured in a voice that doesn't need my help. My job was to keep my corner of the scene simple enough for that fact to land without knocking anything over. I opened a drawer and found a small stack of sticky notes plain. No slogans. On the top one I wrote segment expected low volume. No time. Anticipation can swell to fill any container you give it. I prefer a thimble. I stuck the note to the inside cover of the notebook and closed the book, like you close a lid on something that shouldn't evaporate. The day went on at an honest pace. I sorted the recycling. I straightened the drawer where measuring spoons multiply when unobserved. I wiped the inside of the microwave and the handle of the refrigerator. None of this was avoidance. It was stagecraft, the kind that makes a scene read clearly without pulling the eye to itself. Near the window sits a small bowl that usually holds keys. Today it held nothing. I lifted it, wiped the inside, and set it down clean. Empty containers are permissions you do not have to carry yesterday into noon. In the reflection of the glass, I watched my hands do small work and felt the rest of me follow their example. By early afternoon, the sky turned the color of old pewter. I stood and let the room measure me back chair to table. Table to shelf. Shelf to lamp. Everything where it should be. Without the shine of presentation, there's relief in knowing you do not need to perform to keep your house standing. I considered, briefly, the idea of driving north for a quick appearance, polite hello, early exit, proof of resilience. The idea looked tidy until I tallied the cost time. Posture. A boundary rubbed thin. I left the idea on the counter next to the sponge and watched it lose its shape. Showing up for a role you were told not to play is not grace, it's noise. I brewed tea and let it cool to a lesser steam. The first sip tasted like patience. I wrote a last note to myself for the evening. Let the number be the number. No metaphors. No banners. A public fact doesn't need me to narrate it into meaning. It will sit where record keepers put it, and it will remain there tomorrow. Whether or not I screenshot a single frame. When the light softened further, I tested the blinds and set them to a line that admitted dusk without inviting it to stay. The lamp with the fabric shade cast the same warm ring it always casts. I stood in it and felt my breath match the room. If there's a lesson tucked into mornings like this, it's that steadiness isn't an event. It's a series of small choices that don't ask for applause. I washed the cup, turned the faucet off, and wiped the sink dry. The cloth came away clean. Good. The day could keep its simple report chores done. Posture set. Record ready. When the evening asked its single question, the room would already know the answer. Afternoon narrowed the light until it sat in strips across the floorboards. The city outside quieted the way neighborhoods do when most people are already on highways or in kitchens. I let that hush settle and put the room to work. On the table, the folder. Corners square. Edges even. I lifted the cover and let each page breathe just enough to separate. I am careful with paper. It remembers how you treat it. Attachments matched their letters. Dates agreed with themselves. A short closing statement plain. Final held the weight of the day without flourishes. I traced one margin with the side of my thumb to feel for any snag I'd missed. Smooth. In the notebook I keep for clean records. I wrote a line in regular script. Final confirmations reviewed. No variants. No adjectives. No banners. Regular holds. A small draft moved through the room when the hallway door somewhere down the corridor opened and settled again. I took that as permission to stand. Carry the stack to the window ledge, where the light stayed honest. And read once more. The paper showed its texture in the slant of the sun fibers like grain on wood. I underlined a single date with a pencil, so light it would vanish unless someone went looking for it. That is how I prefer underlines on days like this present. Not performative. The phone on the table remained face down beneath its round of cork. I didn't touch it. Boundaries that only work at night are not boundaries. They're curfews. Today needed rules that hold at any hour. I closed the folder and pressed the cover with my palm, not a ceremony. Only wait meeting wait, then slid it to the top shelf of the bookcase. Left side. Spine flush with the edge. That shelf has become a quiet ledger line in this apartment. Finished items live there. Unfinished items don't pretend. The spine's straightness calmed something in me that speeches never managed to touch. I took a short walk down the hall. The kind you take to let the eyes change distance. The carpet yielded a little under each step. In the stairwell, a rectangle of pale daylight fell through a small window and laid itself across the landing. I stood in it for a count, and returned to my door with my pace set to normal. Back inside. The room looked ready, no clutter asking for attention. No screens asking for a face. I wiped the table with a soft cloth for the simple satisfaction of clean wood, and put the cloth away. Then I sat and began the part I call aftercare, the work you do for the next version of yourself. On a fresh page, I drew a small heading aftercare today. 3 entries only. Because I obey my own rule, that lists should fit on one breath. Archive a clean copy offline, confirm access path. Note 1 improvement for next time. Write a sentence I could read out loud to strangers and not need to explain. For the improvement, I wrote, start the final checklist half a day earlier than instinct margin helps. For the sentence, I wrote, the work was completed as agreed. I set the pen down, watched the ink dull to matte, and felt the room match that finish. From the kitchen, a kettle gave one small click as it cooled. I poured water into a glass, drank, and listened to the quiet that follows a finished task. It's not silence, it's order. Order makes space. On the shelf near the window sits a shallow bowl that usually catches keys. Today, it held nothing, which looked like a decision rather than an accident. I lifted it, wiped the inside with a dry towel, and set it down again. Empty containers are permissions you don't have to carry yesterday into the next hour. Light shifted a few degrees toward evening. Shadows lengthened across the books, turned the spines into alternating stripes. I turned on the small lamp with the fabric shade and let its warm circle land on the table. The fabric throws a quiet light that does not argue with the window. I prefer lights that don't insist. I considered opening the folder again just to feel the steadiness of completion. I didn't. Rechecking out of restlessness teaches the wrong lesson. I rested my hands flat on the table and let the grain explain itself. Growth rings made into lines. Lines made into a surface that can hold weight without complaint. My hands have stacked chairs and carried boxes in other rooms on other nights. Today they carried nothing but air. And the absence felt accurate. In the notebook, I added a small box beside the word archive and filled it with a single stroke. Done is a relief when it stays done. Below it, I wrote a reminder meant for evenings that follow public facts. Let the number remain a number. A figure does not need narration to be true. It will sit where records sit and keep sitting when stories wander off. A sound from the corridor rubber seals giving way, and then catching again, told me a neighbor had left and would be back. Buildings like this have their own habits. When you live with them long enough, they loan you some steadiness. Today, I borrowed as much as I could. I checked the blinds and set them to admit light without glare. On the counter, I divided last night's tray into small portions with simple lids. Half went to the back for another day. Half stayed in reach for later. Labeling with a marker has its place. So does trusting yourself to remember. I sat again and folded a small card for myself, the kind that tucks into the notebook as a page flag. You don't need to watch to believe. I placed it where my thumb would find it without looking. Sometimes the body should lead. A memory approached. Unwelcome, but not dangerous. A kitchen I didn't own. A knife moving to another hand. A calm sentence that tried to make itself law. Years ago, that sentence would have sent me into overtime effort. Today it taught me placement again, where I keep my work. Where I keep my peace. Where I keep my voice. I let the picture fade. You can acknowledge a past without admitting it into the room. The afternoon thinned toward dusk. I took one last look around the apartment, the way a stagehand checks a set, before the curtain lamp steady. Surface is clear. Notebook open to the right page. Volume in my control, even while the screen sleeps. No speeches on the table. No arguments queued up. Only space for a single fact to arrive later and take its measured seat. I wrote one closing line for the chapter of this day, made room for truth to land without knocking anything over. I closed the notebook gently, not as a flourish, but as a promise kept, and slid it back to its place on the shelf, where my hand can find it with the lights off. The room held. Evening would do what evening does. When it brought the thing it meant to bring. I would be here with a posture already chosen. No countdown. No rehearsal of what doesn't need rehearsal. Just a table. A chair. A page that can carry a sentence. And a life that does not need a louder voice to feel real. I let the apartment cool into its evening shape before I reached for the remote. No music. No phone glow, just a room holding still. The lamp cast a quiet circle on the table. I sat at its edge and listened to the small mechanics of a building at peace, a valve settling. A door breathing closed somewhere down the hall. Enough ordinary calm to carry a single fact. The television woke without drama. A pale wash. Then a desk. Then the trained cadence of a voice that moves news along. I set the volume low and left it there. Numbers do not need to be loud to be true. Headlines walked past in their order, weather doing its maps. A short item from far away. A human moment given 30 seconds of soft music. The crawl kept its steady scroll at the bottom, spelling out a world that would keep turning whether I watched or not. I sat back, hands flat on my knees. Posture even. No leaning toward the screen as if proximity could change content. There's a small shift in tempo when business segments start the breath before a precise sentence. Even at low volume, you can hear it. The way you can hear a room lean forward before a curtain rises. The shot widened. The graphics slid in on rails. The voice went level with intent. $80 million. The syllables crossed the room, placed on air with care, and then left to stand. No exclamation. No flourish. A sum measured and read in the tone built for sums. On the screen arrows, a map. A simple board, with the figure living at its center. The camera honored it for a moment, then moved on to the next piece. As broadcasts must. I did not chase the number with a photograph. I did not rehearse what I would say, if anyone asked how it felt. Feeling isn't the point of a ledger entry. The point is that the entry exists where public things live and will still be there in the morning. No matter who was invited to dinner and who wasn't. A thought tried to bargain, call him now. Put the room on speaker. Let the broadcast draw the line, so you don't have to. I watched that impulse step into the light, and then step off. Boundaries kept by quiet do not need an audience to be real. I lowered the volume a notch until the anchor's words became shape without text. The screen's light washed the room thinly. The lamp's circle held its ground. I turned my glass a quarter inch and left a damp ring on the wood. Later, I would wipe it away. For now, it could live there, a small trace of presence that knew its place. The program drifted to weather again. Then to a story designed to ease the hour closed. I clicked the set off. The screen returned my outline and the lamp's reflection, doubling the room without adding anything to it. Breaking point, it turns out, is quiet. Not a slam. Not a speech. Just the moment a public record says what needs saying and a private life refuses to perform. At the shelf, I opened the notebook to the page marked aftercare and wrote one line that didn't need an underline, public record noted, no reply required. I dated it and closed the cover. The cloth warmed under my palm and cooled again. Tools. Then rest. In the kitchen. The refrigerator light made the containers look more deliberate than they were. I took nothing out. Enough had happened for one night. I rinsed my glass, dried it, and returned it to the shelf. When I came back to the table, the ring on the wood had dulled to a faint halo. I pressed the cloth to it one pass, then another until it disappeared. The surface looked as it had before the hour began. Up north, a long table would be thinning to final conversation. Plates stacked. Foil folded. Chairs angled back a little from the work of gathering. Maybe my chair carried a coat. Maybe it sat empty. Either way, that room had nothing to do with the sentence that just joined the world's memory. A number is a stubborn thing. It does not check guest lists. It does not ask who carved the bird. It stands where it's placed, and it keeps standing. I walked to the window and let the cool pane find my fingertips. Seattle. Washington does nights in layers, storefront pools of light. Dark alleys with their own weather. Buses gliding like mild intentions. The mist softened edges without erasing them. Down on the corner, A driver opened a door to no one and closed it again on time. Practice matters, even when no one is there to witness. Back at the table, I checked the phone only to confirm the crescent for Do Not Disturb held. It did. No alerts had wandered through. I set the device face down and left it at that. Replies are agreements. I had no new ones to make. The apartment felt larger than it had an hour ago. Not because the number expanded anything, but because I had refused to let an old sentence shrink the room. That is the justice. I understand placement. Where a fact sits. Where your voice doesn't. What you refuse to carry to prove what already exists. I wrote a last line for myself before sleep, an instruction. Not a motto. Let the record carry itself. Let the night keep its size. Then I turned the page corner just enough to find it again if some future day needed, reminding. On my way to bed, I paused at the table and looked at the spot where the ring had been. Nothing remained. Not because it had never happened, but because care had done its job and moved on. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into outlines that have learned me by now: chair, shelf, window, door. Enough geometry to hold a life that stops arguing with verdicts it did not write. In the dark, I lay down and let breath find its slow, ordinary pace. The number would still be in the record in the morning. The invitation I didn't accept would still be an invitation I didn't accept. Both truths could live side by side without asking me to solve them. Quiet is not absence. It is the presence of a decision kept somewhere above. Floorboards gave a friendly complaint and then rested. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed itself empty and coasted home. The city kept its promises. It kept mine. That was enough for one night. After the broadcast, the apartment kept a steady quiet that did not ask to be interpreted. I left the television dark and let the room settle into clean edges. The clock on the oven showed 2 digits and a colon late enough for decisions to be simple. I stood by the table and made a short list in my head of what belongs to this hour. Trim the noise that tries to sneak back in. Choose tomorrow's pace before sleep. Chooses it for me. Leave no loose threads that might tug at dawn. Nothing dramatic. Just housework for the mind. The phone lay where I'd left it. I didn't lift it to argue with any ghost of the day. Instead, I opened settings and narrowed the routes by which people can arrive uninvited. A few taps. A small rearrangement calls from favorites, only until morning. Banners set to silent, badges off. I didn't block. I didn't announce. I organized. There's a difference. Organization holds when moods do not. In the Notes app, I created a folder with a plain title and moved a handful of old messages into it, the ones that keep trying to be current. Out of sight isn't denial, it's filing. I added one line beneath the folder name to remind myself why it exists: reference. Not residence. Then I put the phone face down and let it be a tool again. The apartment looked like itself, chairs square to the table. The rug aligned with the floorboards. Blinds set, so the streetlight drew a soft bar across the wall without reaching the bed. I switched off the lamp and walked the small rectangle of the space. Not to check anything, but to tell the body that we are finished traveling for the day. Feet understand closure quicker than thoughts do. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and leaned against the counter while it cooled my hands. The refrigerator hummed once and stilled. Somewhere in the building, plumbing negotiated with gravity and won. I made tomorrow's breakfast decisions in under 10 seconds and put the items I'd need on the front edge of a shelf. A minute of intention tonight saves 10 in the morning. It also keeps me from wandering into screens before I've put anything sensible in my stomach. I do not pray over phones or hold little ceremonies for boundaries. I prefer switches and toggles and plain language. On a scrap of paper, I wrote 3 instructions for tomorrow. All verbs. No adjectives. Reply where needed. Decline what isn't mine. Keep pace. I tucked the scrap inside the notebook and closed the cover without checking the previous pages. The past has already been read. A habit I have kept since I was young: clear the desk before sleep. Not a shine. Not performance, just the removal of stray paper clips and tired receipts. I slid a single pen back into its tray and squared the coaster with the table's edge. Small alignments keep the larger ones from drifting. I have seen this in rooms and in people. It would be easy here to write a speech to the empty air about independence. To raise a voice for practice and call it progress. I didn't. I loaded the dishwasher with the few things that needed heat and water, added soap, and started the cycle. The sound was practical and rhythmic. The kind of low industry that belongs to kitchens at night. I prefer that to speeches. Speeches leave echoes, clean plates leave shelves. I thought briefly of driving north in the morning. Not to enter the house, but to stand by the water a mile away from it. The idea had scenery and therefore felt honest. I let it run for a moment. Then I counted the cost gasoline. Attention. A boundary turned ornamental. I set the idea down and watched it shrink to its real size. Independence improves with practice. Not with tours. At the window. The city kept modest time. Traffic lights changed for intersections with no cars at them. A distant siren faded before it found my block. A jogger made a bright arc across the corner, in a hat that knew how to be seen. I listened until the sounds stopped trying to carry messages, and returned to being sounds. Back at the table, I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote one line I could sign even half asleep. No contact tonight, not a punishment. A policy. I underlined policy once, so the word would hold shape in the morning. Then I closed the book and slid it back so the spine lined up with the shelf edge. Tomorrow's version of me will know where to find it without thinking. I changed the lock screen on my phone to a plain color. No photos. No slogans. When devices stop telling you who you are, they become easier to put down. I set an alarm for a reasonable hour and chose a tone that would not startle. Startle makes poor company at breakfast. The tray of stuffing I hadn't eaten became 3 small containers. One for breakfast if the morning asks for it, one for later, one to take down to the lobby's shared shelf in case somebody else wants a portion of almost holiday. I labeled nothing. Not every kindness needs ink. On a legal pad, I wrote 4 names, the ones I call when things are complicated, and drew a check mark next to none of them. I didn't need to tell anyone how the day had arranged itself. Not every true thing asks for witnesses. The legal pad went in a drawer with a neat slide. The names will be there when they're needed. Not when I'm lonely. Sleep wants a runway. Not a cliff. I lengthened the runway by doing the small things slowly. Shirt folded to the same width as the drawer. Shoes set together so the laces don't pretend to be obstacles in the morning. Keys on the entry shelf where hands find them without eyes. People call this control. I call it hospitality for future moments. Near midnight. My father's sentence tried to return as if time were a window it could climb through twice. It arrived thinner, lacking the weight it had borrowed from surprise. I did not replace that weight for it. I let it speak without standing up to listen. Then I put the sentence where it belongs among statements I cannot edit and do not have to obey. There are rooms in this apartment that store what I won't carry. Tonight I added that line to the shelf. Before bed, I drafted a 2-sentence reply. I might use someday, if a conversation earns it. Not an argument. Not evidence. Only a boundary written in polite grammar. I'm not available for exchanges that rename me. If you want to talk, choose words that leave both of us intact. I didn't send it. I didn't even save it. Writing can be practice, the way stretching is practice. The body remembers the range even if you never sprint. I brushed my teeth, turned the bathroom light off, and let the hall keep only enough glow to find the door frame. In the bedroom, I set the phone on the dresser instead of the nightstand and pointed its screen toward the wall. Distance helps. Out of reach is often more restful than face down. From the bed. The ceiling looked as steady as it had in the morning. I counted 4 breaths in, 6 out, until the numbers felt like counting steps on a familiar street. Sleep comes quicker when you've already decided what you won't reopen. I had decided. What I wanted from this hour, I kept a plan for tomorrow that doesn't begin with defense. A line between what is mine to answer and what is not. A room that signals completion without pretending triumph. Independence, at least tonight, isn't a speech or a milestone. It is a set of small doors closed with care, leaving the house warmer without making it airtight. Just before I drifted, I pictured the oven clock with its 2 digits and a colon. Late. Yes. But honest. I let the image dim like a lamp on a dimmer and let the day fold where it should. Morning would arrive on schedule. As mornings do. The fact would still be in the record. The policy would still be in force. And I would wake in a room arranged to help me keep both. Daylight arrived as a measured rectangle on the wall. The sort that grows by inches rather than drama. I woke without an alarm and let the room finish arranging itself before I sat up. No rush. No script to perform, just a morning, with its own quiet momentum. In the kitchen, the kettle did its simple work. I leaned against the counter while steam curled away and the mug warmed my hands. The first sip tasted like a plan, unhurried. Clear. I ate something small and plain. The way you do when you want the day to stand on its own feet. I turned on the television long enough to catch the morning recap. Volume low. The business block ran its neat carousel. And there it was again. Trimmed to a single sentence and a graphic that didn't need help to be understood. $80 million. No swelling music. No commentary, fishing for feeling, just a summary that placed the figure where roundups keep such figures. Good. A fact confirmed without ceremony holds better than a celebration. I didn't reach for the phone to send anything to anyone. No screenshot. No caption. I let the set move on and powered it off. The room returned to its usual dimensions. And for a moment I listened to nothing in particular, a metal click from the vent. A far-off elevator door completing its job. Someone's footsteps choosing the stairs over the lift. Mornings have their own civic sounds. At the table, I opened the notebook only to add a concise entry under yesterday's notes. Recap aired. Proceed as planned. Then I closed it and slid it back. Not everything needs another paragraph. I cleared the surface plate. Mug? A stray envelope that had wandered out of the drawer and put a damp cloth through a short efficient loop. Order doesn't make a person more worthy. It makes the next task easier to find. Work didn't require me this morning. But I gave it a sensible hour anyway. I reviewed a checklist I keep for closing periods, archive digital copies, confirm access paths, file the offline set, where my hands will not mistake it for something pending. Each item took less time than it would have if I'd left them for later. I've learned not to let later stack up, just because a single line on television tried to make the day feel bigger than it is. I put on a jacket and stepped outside for air that smelled like wet cedar. Seattle. Washington does mornings in layers, cyclists ticking past. Delivery vans staking brief claims at curbs. An older couple carrying paper cups and speaking softly as they walked. I followed a block along the water and watched gulls perform their unworried geometry. No symbolism required, just movement that knows its purpose. Back upstairs. The lobby offered its small theater, a bulletin about scheduled maintenance. A carpet stripe newly vacuumed. A wreath adjusted to center. I checked the mailbox. Found nothing urgent. And took the stairs. Halfway up. A narrow window framed a sliver of sky that looked newer than it probably was. I paused. Counted 3 breaths. And kept going. On my desk. The folder stayed on the top shelf where it belongs. I didn't touch it. Completion felt better at a distance. Instead, I drafted 2 short messages I'd been meaning to send, plain acknowledgments to general addresses. No names. No adjectives. Then read each once to make sure I hadn't smuggled in a request for praise. Satisfied. I sent them and closed the laptop. Hungry again. I made breakfast from what I'd portioned last night. The fork made a clean tap against the plate and then quieted. I ate at the counter while the window gathered more light. Across the courtyard, a neighbor stepped onto a balcony with a blanket over their shoulders. They lifted a hand at the weather, as if taking attendance, and went back inside. We share walls. Not stories. That felt exactly right. I took 10 minutes to straighten a drawer that collects odd things, rubber bands that pretend to be necessary, batteries that wait for a use. 2 went into a bag for recycling. 3 stayed. The rest found a rightful place. Small decisions conserve attention. Later in the day, I'd rather spend that attention on something less trivial than a tangled ribbon of chargers. The phone waited where I'd left it. I checked for anything that demanded a reply. One message did. I answered in 2 sentences, and declined a meeting that would have been scheduled out of habit rather than need. Boundaries can be courteous without being vague. I used the same phrase I practiced last night and let it do its job, not available for exchanges that rename me. Then I returned the device to its face-down posture and walked away. Late morning. I sat by the window and wrote a one-line instruction across a sticky note paste over noise. I stuck it inside the notebook's cover and let the edges show. Not as a banner. Just as a nudge. Then I got up and moved my body through a few stretches. I trust calves. Shoulders. Wrists. The world isn't kinder to you because a broadcast mentioned your work. Your back is, if you treat it right, on the shelf. A small bowl for keys held exactly what it should. One ring. Nothing extra. I picked it up, set it down again, and smiled at the accuracy. So many messes begin as just-in-case objects. Today I would have none. I gave the apartment a brisk maintenance tour. Windows latched, a plant watered enough to darken the topsoil, trash consolidated, a single sticky label removed from a jar and thrown away because that's how jars become useful. No part of it felt like fixing my mood. My mood didn't need fixing. It needed the same plain structure it receives on ordinary days. At a reasonable hour, I allowed myself one more glance at an online article that summarized the segment. Short. Factual. No commentary that would try to graft somebody else's emotion onto my evening. I read the paragraph containing the figure. Then closed the tab. Curiosity satisfied. Appetite intact. Lunch was simple and quiet. After, I put on a different jacket and walked a few blocks for a grocery item I was missing. The cashier wished me a good holiday weekend. And I returned the wish without explanation. People do not need your biography to receive your courtesy. Back home, I placed the item neatly where it belonged. Answered 2 routine emails with clear subject lines and dates spelled out. And moved a reminder from today to next week, because today had done enough. I wrote a short line in the notebook that future me would appreciate more than anyone else, kept the day ordinary on purpose. That sentence earns its keep long after attention fades. Late afternoon. I brewed tea and left it to cool while I stood at the window. The sky loosened to a lighter shade than morning. A bus paused at the corner and left with more people than it had collected. A cyclist slowed to let a pedestrian pass. Tiny. Seamless negotiations everywhere. Proof that order isn't a performance, it's an agreement. I considered calling my father. The idea arrived without malice and left the same way. No wait. No sting. Just a thought that understood. The door was closed gently. Not locked. I let it pass and returned to the tea. Before the light slanted too far, I did one last round of simple tasks that make evening easier, set out the pan I'd use later. Filled a pitcher. Folded the throw on the sofa. Placed tomorrow's shirt on a hanger, where I'd see it without searching. Hospitality for future moments. It gives them fewer reasons to panic. I checked the phone a final time for the afternoon. Nothing urgent. Good. I set Do Not Disturb for the evening again, not as a wall. As a filter. Tools work best when you tell them what job they have. By the time the sun moved behind the neighboring building, the apartment looked unremarkable in the best way. Nothing in the wrong place. Nothing trying to mean more than it should. The folder on the shelf stayed closed. The number in last night's segment stayed where the public keeps numbers. The chair held my weight without complaint. That is the shape of stability I trust, rooms that help you keep pace, choices that don't ask to be applauded, a life that is not louder just because someone said a figure out loud. I turned on the lamp and wrote one sentence to close the chapter on this morning, after recognition received, routine preserved. Then I capped the pen and let the page breathe. The rest of the day could proceed at human scale. Quiet does not erase a victory, it lets it settle in without knocking over the furniture. By late day, the color outside had shifted from silver to something closer to slate. I let the apartment keep its unobtrusive order and sat at the table with a pen that writes a clean line. No speeches. No audience. Just the task I had set for myself since yesterday, put the boundary into practice, so it can hold without constant attention. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and titled it in small letters, Terms. Underneath. Short clauses plain. Testable. Without edge. I do not answer statements that rename me. I respond to logistics. I do not defend identity. Calls after evening, go to morning, unless safety is involved. Invitations that arrive as verdicts do not require reply. 4 lines. Enough. The point was not to harden, the point was to remove guesswork. I dated the page and drew a narrow margin so the text had room to breathe. That was the closest thing to a ceremony I needed. From the drawer, I took a stack of old calendar entries with titles like Thanksgiving travel and family prep. I changed each to personal time and shifted them out of the repeating category. It was not deletion, it was a correction. The screen asked if I wanted to update future events. Yes. The relief was immediate and unshowy. Like setting a picture frame straight. I moved to voicemail and rewrote the greeting in steady grammar. No biography. No apology. Leave your name. Purpose. And a time window for a return call. I return calls in business hours. If this is urgent for safety, say so first. I listened once to make sure it sounded like a grown adult and saved it. Policy is a calm thing when said out loud. The folder on the shelf stayed where it belonged. I didn't touch it. The number that ran last night did not need a guardian. And I did not need a trophy. What I needed was a small architecture for my days, doors that open and close because hinges were installed. Not because I remembered to stand in the doorway. I took a brief walk in the hallway to stretch my legs and let my mind finish whatever work remained of the morning. The building's common laundry room tossed a steady hum through the air. Someone's dryer clicked like a slow metronome. A bulletin board carried the usual notices, maintenance. A lost glove with its partner, waiting for a claim. Nothing asked for me. That felt appropriate. Back at the table, I wrote the shape of a message I might use if the situation ever truly required words. Not a trap. Not an indictment, just a boundary in conversational form. I won't continue when the language makes me smaller. If you want to talk, use words we can both live with after the call ends. I didn't send it. Some sentences are for training the tongue, not the thread. Practical things followed. In my contacts, I grouped a few numbers under low priority so they would wait behind what pays the rent and what keeps the body well. In the Notes app, I made a page called Reference and moved a handful of old texts there, the kind that try to re-enlist themselves whenever a holiday nears. Reference is where records go. Residence is for the living. I keep the difference clear now. I checked the wall clock. It was the sort of hour that offers either drift or decision. I chose decision. On a single index card, I wrote a 1-line directive for the next 30 days, pace over reaction. I tucked the card into the inside cover of the notebook so half an edge showed. Not as decoration. As a handle. When the month turns, I'll choose a new line. For now, this one will do the heavy lifting by being simple. Evening skimmed the tops of the buildings across the way. A neighbor's balcony light clicked on. The filament brightened without complaint. I stood by the window long enough to identify the exact way the block shifts from day to not quite night. Then stepped back and let the outside continue without me. Quiet justice is rarely a gesture anyone else can see. It looks like reordering. Like putting tools in the drawers where they actually belong. It looks like rewriting a calendar entry so the square stops lying about what it is. It looks like deciding which hours of your life are not for negotiation and then keeping your own appointment with those hours. I turned to a task I had avoided for years because it felt minor and therefore strangely hard, deleting an old draft email titled, "What I Meant to Say." The subject line had waded through multiple seasons. Changed apartments. Survived 2 laptops. I opened it and read, a paragraph. The tone tried to be reasonable while carrying a box of paint up a staircase. I highlighted the whole thing and pressed delete. The trash asked for confirmation. Yes. The screen went blank in that folder, and the folder looked healthier immediately. In the kitchen, I set out what I'd need later and wrote a 2-item list for the morning on a small sticky. Send the simple note, take the walk before screens. I placed the sticky on the inside of the cabinet door so the day would introduce itself with actions before opinions. Then I washed my hands in water that had made up its mind to be cold and dried them on a clean towel. The phone, face down, stayed a device. I lifted it long enough to set a focus schedule for the next 48 hours work hours clear. Evenings tightened to familiar numbers. I didn't build a wall, I built a filter. It's better for everyone that way. I sat again and let stillness do its work. The room had no interest in theatrics. The furniture remained furniture. The chair held me without questioning my reasons. I wrote one clean sentence that I could stand beside a year from now. I chose distance where argument would only repeat itself. I drew a small square beside it and made a single dot inside the square. Not a check mark. A point. A point is a location. I wanted to remember where I stood. For a minute, I pictured the holiday table up north. Not to judge it. Just to give it a place in the map. A dish covered with foil, a stack of plates, the stretch of conversation that follows pie when people pretend they don't hear the dishwasher insist on being loaded. In that picture, I placed an empty chair and left it vague on purpose. Symbols can become heavy. I kept this one light enough to move if needed. Dusk pressed in, and the apartment received it without ceremony. I turned on the overhead light in the kitchen, not the lamp's softer circle. A different shape of brightness, and wiped the counter with long passes. The cloth came away clean. I returned it neatly. Not as proof of anything, as closure for the hour. There was one more piece to finish the habit of answering out of reflex. I practiced the pause that prevents it. 10 seconds is enough time to let a thought finish its sprint and sit down. I counted them on the second hand of the wall clock. Then on my breath. Then without counting at all. It is surprising how much space 10 quiet seconds create. The page labeled Terms looked complete to me. I added a final line above the date: revise after New Year if needed. Policies deserve maintenance like any good tool. I folded the top corner lightly and closed the book. I didn't touch the television. I didn't scan news. I didn't look for one more version of last night's figure. Recognition had done its single job, now structure would do mine. I walked the short path to the bedroom and set the phone on the dresser. Screen turned toward the wall. Charger coiled like a well-behaved line. Then I went back to the table and sat for one more minute with nothing in my hands. Confrontation, if the word even fits, had occurred not with raised voice or written indictment, but with a few signatures of order that make tomorrow honest. The effect was quiet and real. The room looked the same to anyone else. It felt different to me in ways that matter, a place arranged to keep my shape when other people try to redraw it. I turned off the kitchen light and let the apartment return to its softer outline. On my way to bed, I glanced at the notebook one last time. The edge of the index card peeked out pace over reaction. It would be waiting in the morning. Not as a dare. As a reminder. I liked that arrangement. It asked nothing loud. And it kept the day from asking for more of me than the day deserves. Rain came lightly. The kind that dots a window and then forgets where it landed. I let the apartment ease into its later rhythm, dimmer light. Slower steps. Tasks reduced to the size of one hand. No television. No new tabs. The day had already told me everything it planned to tell. I set a pot on the stove for tea and waited without checking a clock. Steam rose in a thin column and drifted sideways, dissolving before it reached the cupboard. The mug warmed my grip. The heat worked on my shoulders like a quiet suggestion. I carried it to the table and didn't open the notebook yet. Not every thought deserves ink. Some need to sit a while and prove they'll behave. Across the courtyard, a neighbor's curtain breathed in and out as air moved through a ventilator. A pen scratched faintly in the next room over someone working a crossword or signing a card. The sounds had nothing to do with me. That felt like the right scale for an evening that wasn't asking for performance. I took the last of yesterday's sticky notes and wrote 2 short lines. Keep the day ordinary on purpose. Answer with structure. Not volume. I stuck the note on the inside of a cabinet door and closed it. Tomorrow would see it when hands wanted dishes. The reminder belonged at that height eye level when you're reaching for something useful. The phone stayed on the dresser in the other room. Screen turned away. Distance made its case better than discipline. I could have fetched it and scrolled the edges of the day for stragglers. I didn't. Any message that truly couldn't wait would survive 12 hours. Most can survive longer. Quiet is not a dare, it's a decision. On the shelf. The folder kept its place and its silence. I walked past without contact and sat by the window. Streetlight pooled on wet asphalt, and reflections arranged themselves into a kind of temporary calligraphy. A bus hissed to a stop and moved on. Somewhere below, a bicycle chain clicked twice and fell into its smooth loop. The block performed its modest transitions without asking me to applaud. I opened the notebook and turned to the page labeled Terms from earlier. It held. I didn't add a rule. I added a sentence that belonged under the ones already written. Gentle is not weak when it is consistent. I dated it and drew a short line beneath. The way you underline something, only to the extent it needs. For a minute, I let my mind push against the same old door should I reach out and clear the air. As if air clears because you tell it to. I pictured the exchange polite. Careful. Certain to circle the same patch of ground, and then pictured the ground after. Unchanged. The image did not ask for a caption. I closed the door on it and felt no draft. Dinner asked very little, a pan warmed. A single plate set down where it belongs. The kind of food that keeps you from inventing reasons to leave the house at an unnecessary hour. I ate standing. Then sat. Then finished. The sink took its share of the work without commentary. Every motion added up to a report. I could sign nothing wasted. Nothing dramatized. I sharpened a pencil I like and wrote a paragraph I'd want to find months from now. When details fade and principles have to do more lifting than memories. Last night the number joined the public record. Today I chose routine over spectacle. There was no speech and no reply. Only a boundary kept. The absence of noise made more meaning than noise would have. I paused. Read it once for tone. And left it there. Clarity has a temperature. This felt like room temperature usable. Unforced. A memory wandered past one of those evenings in a different apartment where I practiced lines I never got to deliver. I didn't chase it. And it didn't linger. Practice is allowed to retire. I set a small timer. Not to rush me. To keep me from drifting. And gave the apartment 10 minutes of deliberate care, a plant turned toward better light. Shoes paired at the door. A drawer eased shut, so nothing catches. None of it qualifies as a story. All of it adds to a life that doesn't trip on itself. When the timer clicked, I returned to the table and drafted a note to myself 3 weeks out, review terms. Keep what helped. Remove what turned fussy. Policies deserve revision, the way tools deserve sharpening. I addressed the reminder to a weekday morning and added no ornament. I thought of the long table up north, probably cleared by now. The last plate drying in a rack. The room cooling to its off-hours temperature. In that picture, I allowed one chair to remain undefined. Not mina. Not anyone's. Undefined felt more accurate than empty. Accuracy. I'm finding. Is kinder than triumph. The evening asked for a message. Something I could keep without needing to say it aloud more than once. I wrote. Do not confuse quiet with absence. It is presence at a responsible volume. I closed the notebook and slid it back to the shelf. Not beside the folder, but one space away. So my hand would meet paper before it met paper about paper. Touch the living record first. That arrangement made sense in a way I didn't need to explain. A draft came through the vent and rearranged a few pages I'd left loose. I squared them and put a clip where it belonged. The clip clicked in that satisfying way metal does when it meets the job it was made for. I smiled at the proportion of it, the right tool doing a small thing that keeps larger things in place. My father's sentence tried one more time to prove it had stamina. It arrived thinner than before, with less posture. I didn't counter it. I acknowledged it like an old headline in a newspaper, "You've already recycled." The label didn't stick tonight. Not because I fought it. Because there was nowhere for it to land. I rinsed the mug. Left it to dry on a towel. And dimmed the lamp. The window caught my outline and reduced it to shapes that meant person without implying mood. It was pleasant to be rendered as a silhouette, recognizable and free of commentary. Before bed, I wrote one final line. Not on the big page, but on a narrow strip, I slid into the notebook like a bookmark. Proceed at human speed. I will find that strip when I forget that speed is a choice. In the bedroom, the phone kept its distance on the dresser. I didn't check it. The clock face offered a time that didn't need to be translated into urgency. I set out tomorrow's shirt and folded the sweater I wore today with the sleeves tucked in, so they won't snake out when I open the drawer. The room acknowledged the gesture by looking ready for morning. Lying down, I let the quiet separate into layers building. Block. Weather. Each had its job. Mine had been to keep mine. The number remained where the public keeps numbers. The policy remained where I keep policies. The evening completed its route without detours. If there was a lesson, it wasn't about winning. It was about maintenance of dignity. Of pace. Kind of doors you can close, without slamming. I closed my eyes and let the day fold itself along the crease I'd made for it. Tomorrow will not be larger because I demand it. It will be workable because I prepared a place for it to land. That is the message I can carry without spilling honor what is true. Keep your line. And let rooms you trust do part of the holding.